The world of sea slavery on the South China Sea and the countries that surround it certainly was a dark place. But there were heroes, too. Among those were the anti-trafficking advocates who specialize in rescuing deckhands when they attempt to flee their ships. While in Thailand, I made a point of trying to visit as many of these anti-trafficking advocates as I could, just to learn a little bit about how they go about helping to rescue and relocate these escapees. In response to the international outcry about sea slavery and human trafficking problems, the Thai government in the past several years has done a lot to try to address the problems. They still have a ways to go, and one of the goals I had in reporting in Thailand was to take a close look at how the government was attempting to find these cases, and specifically their at-sea spot check program, as well as their in-port inspection program. The government was going to need to get on the boats at sea and check on conditions. The government was also going to have to be in ports and vet the boats and their crews to suss out whether there was human trafficking and other labor abuses. And so I asked the Thai government, and specifically the Thai Navy, which was running the inspection regime, if I could embed with their patrols and go for a couple weeks to a bunch of cities around the country and go to sea essentially with them and watch how they do their inspections. And they said yes, and were really flexible and accommodating, allowing me quite broad access. And so what I saw was both the challenge of doing real worker interviews and real inspections at sea, and just how difficult it was. I had underestimated that. I saw earnest effort from the government, but I also saw significant shortfalls in how they went about trying to interview the workers on the ships when they would pull alongside them and board them. The problems that emerged established the difference between inspections that are pro forma versus inspections that are effective, which is to say there was a lot of box checking going on where it was a paperwork exercise to a large degree, well-intentioned, earnest, but nonetheless not one that would be very likely to actually find the problems that they were ostensibly looking for. Inspectors also seemed to miss anomalies when the contract said that the men were supposed to be paid one amount, and then when talking with the men, they in passing cited different numbers. Inspectors didn't pause and attempt to dig deeper. There were also no translators with us, and so typically the inspector relied on the bosun on deck. And the bosun is an interesting character. He's typically allied with the officers, usually speaks Thai, but he also typically speaks the language of the crew, so in this case Cambodian, and his job on these ships is to keep them in line. So for the inspector to select the bosun as their translator is deeply problematic, because that's the one person who perhaps should most be separated out and moved away from the crew if you're hoping to get honest answers from the workers about their true conditions. So these sort of structural problems in how they conducted the interviews looked like a rigorous exercise, but one that in many ways, in my view, was not likely to result in an honest reckoning or discovery of real abuse. Credit to the Thai government for attempting to implement an inspection regime, and in the course of about 3, 4, 5 years, the Thai government has really responded to its labor problems in a broad way, attempting to create a database of all fishing vessels, implementing this identification card system, implementing the inspection regime, actually pursuing some prosecutions against human traffickers. All these were real accomplishments by the Thai government, but the areas where they certainly needed to improve was this next level of enforcement, and that was one that would be based probably on worker interviews and actual legitimate intel about true abuse. One of Thailand's biggest port cities is called Kantang, which is the hub of the Thai overseas fishing fleet. So these are larger vessels that go much further away, and Thailand's major port for those vessels has always been Kantang. Kantang, as a result, is also a location that has gotten a lot of negative attention as abuses have come to light, quite especially with the overseas fleet, because those are the vessels that stay at sea the longest and are furthest away, and historically have been the least regulated ships with the worst trafficking and human rights abuses. So Kantang has a bit of a reputation as a particularly problematic port. Kantang is also the location of the Thai government's showcase prosecution against human traffickers in the Thai fishing fleet. And in 2013 and again in 2015, the Thai government pursued charges against a company called Boonlarp, based largely on evidence gathered and years of investigation conducted by various groups. At the forefront of those was the Environmental Justice Foundation, or EJF. It resulted in a successful prosecution in which a half dozen people tied to the Boonlarp company were arrested, charged, convicted. Several of them were acquitted. Several captains and a notorious guard who was the main enforcer in the Boonlarp company and sort of doled out the most brutal torture and murders in the business of keeping trafficked workers in line. So I had wanted to go to Kantang to take a look at this case and the city and the company. But before I went there, I decided to go to Myanmar, which is where most of the workers from the Boonlarp case were from. I went to Myanmar specifically to talk with some of the former workers who had been on the ships that had been involved with the human trafficking case that the Thai government prosecuted in 2015. I met with about a half dozen of these workers and spent the day with them and heard from them, and most of them were deeply pleased that the Thai government had actually pursued this case and had won convictions of a good number of the high-level people involved in their abuse. But one thing that struck me was that these Burmese workers were consistently frustrated that the Thai government had pursued the case based on human trafficking and pursued trafficking charges, but had not pursued murder charges. And all of them said that there was resounding evidence of murder. Many of them had witnessed it firsthand, and they said that dozens of others had as well, and that this evidence had been handed over by them and by EJF to the Thai government, but the Thai government had not attempted to prosecute these people tied to the Boonlarp on murder charges, but instead on trafficking charges. The guy at the head of that was this guard who was acquitted, and his name was Liam. One of my main goals when I left Myanmar and headed back to Thailand, and specifically to Kantang, was to see if I could find Liam. When I got to Kantang, I hired a driver, and selecting that driver needed to be handled carefully because it's a small city, and I didn't want word getting around that Western journalist was snooping around. I got some help from sources and found a guy who was not from the area, but he knew the area. He was vetted and said to be safe and discreet, and he happened to also be an undercover police officer. And so this driver indeed was quite useful, and for the first couple of days we looked for a captain who had been acquitted in the Boonlarp case, and we looked for Liam as well. We found the captain and visited him at his house. And I can't say that we got a whole lot out of the conversation. It was very contentious. Eventually, we were told quite aggressively to leave, and the captain denied all allegations of ever having abused any of the Burmese workers. He reiterated that he had been acquitted and challenged any of the Burmese workers we had interviewed to come back and tell him to his face that he had abused them. In police records that I had been given, I had seen that this captain was described as the worst of all the Boon Larp fishing vessel captains in terms of the intensity of his abuse. But we got no admission from him of that, and after about 45 minutes of talking with him, we moved on. The next couple days was spent looking for Liam. And on the first day of that process, we lost our driver. When our driver heard who we were going to target next for an interview, he pulled the car over and said he quit, and said that he wouldn't even knock on the door at Liam's house because Liam was far too dangerous. And so I called for a source in Bangkok in the police department and asked him for help in providing us with some protection. And we promptly received a visit from 2 uniformed federal officers who then became our drivers and were willing to take us to Liam's house. Before we set off to Liam's house, the researcher I had with me, a British guy who happens to speak Thai, went to the bathroom. Shortly thereafter, one of the officers also went to the bathroom. The officer, I guess not realizing that my researcher was in the adjacent stall, made a whispered phone call from his stall to someone. And in that call, in Thai, he said, "They've just arrived. We'll be there in about 30 minutes. My researcher overheard the call, waited till the officer left the bathroom, and then emerged. As we drove to Liam's house, my researcher tapped me on the shoulder and whispered in my ear that what had happened and we should be especially careful because it wasn't clear that these officers were on our side. We got to Liam's house, and truth be told, I'm fairly certain that Liam was directly inside, but we never spoke to him. We spent the next 40 minutes interrogating his wife, who came out front, and she proceeded to feed us one lie after another. Her story shifted from she wasn't married to Liam to yes, she was married to him, she hadn't seen him in a while, to he had been there the day before. She at one point said he didn't live there. We showed her pictures of the scooter that Liam owned and clothes he'd been photographed wearing, and both that scooter was parked out front and those very clothes were hanging on the clothesline next to the front door. But Liam never emerged, the wife never cracked, and we left there fairly frustrated. If there was anything to be learned, it was that you can find these culprits. We were able to locate the captain. We were able to locate Liam. We had good intel from the Burmese workers, specifics of where murders occurred, where bodies were buried. So the notion of prosecuting these sorts of cases based on murder, not just trafficking, was not a far-fetched one. At the same time, there were other real barriers. The local level corruption and involvement of officers in these trafficking networks is a real difficulty that may make it tough for the Thai government to actually prosecute the harder cases, like the murder cases.